You're just joining us. This is The World This Week in partnership with the International Herald Tribune. With us this week, Sylvie Kaufmann of Le Monde, Christopher Dickey of Newsweek and The Daily Beast, Tunde Fatunde of the Lagos Guardian, and Dana Harman of Haaretz. Now, there have been false starts before, but as of this Friday, the deal is still on. Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, held for 5 years in Gaza since his kidnapping, to be exchanged for 1,027 Palestinian prisoners to be freed in several installments. For those who don't follow the Middle East very closely, the ratio is a bit startling, as you can see in this cartoon by the International Herald Tribune's Patrick Chapat, where one guy is coming out of jail in Israel saying, "I did the math, I'm worth 70 grams of Israeli soldier." But the head of Israel's Shin Bet Security Services calls it the best deal possible under the circumstances. Dana Harman, explain that math to us.
Clearly the math is skewed, but these were the sort of numbers that have been talked about for years almost and not been accepted. But at this point, I think that it is a good deal, possibly for both sides, good deal, in that things have changed and are changing in the Middle East. Primarily, I think that Abbas's sort of rise on the internet, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian...
Wait, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. Before we get to that, how does one Israeli soldier equal 1,027 Palestinian prisoners?
He doesn't. I suppose there's something to do with how much value those people have to the people that are negotiating on their behalf. And in Israel, Gilad Shalit is everyone's son and everyone's brother, and there's an enormous amount of sentiment pushing and demanding and desiring him home, and has been for all these years, and it's of critical importance in Israel, that issue. A lot of the Palestinian prisoners are not known, or there hasn't been big campaigns on behalf of any one particular Palestinian prisoner. There was actually in one case of Marwan Barghouti, but he's not one of the people who's getting out. So I think it depends on the value you place on those people. It depends how much you want the deal to be done. It's hard to explain, and it's an unusual circumstance. I don't think it's happened in any exchanges of prisoners elsewhere in the world, particularly.
Maybe it's got to do with the balance of forces also.
Well, but maybe Dana knows the answer to this. I don't actually know, but I know that a lot of the people who are being released, a lot of the Palestinians, were actually in prison without charges. I mean, there were some people who were there on murder charges.
Actually, a lot of the people being released are ones that Prime Minister Netanyahu fought not to release, and that have been involved actually in terrorist attacks. And
what I don't know is what a lot means.
Well, now they're releasing 450. The first ones, I think 260 of them. I wrote down the numbers. 260 of them are ones that were involved in some sort of terror.
So 200 and some were not.
Were not, and then there's another 550 that will be released later. But all those people are prisoners. It's interesting. Head of our security said that about 60% of those are expected, by past experience, to return to terror activity once they're
released.
Get
involved when they weren't involved before.
Or definitely that they've been radicalized while they were in prison. Sure. And there are others that say, even from prison that they were orchestrating attacks. So that maybe it doesn't make a difference to let them out or not to let them out.
And you mentioned
standing of the Ikhwan, of the Muslim Brotherhood, in Egypt and very probably in Syria. And Hamas is, in fact, part of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, I think right now what Netanyahu's doing is he wants to undermine Abbas because he's got this tactical aim of undermining Abbas, as you're saying. But at the same time, he's doing what the Israelis have done many times before. He's strengthening Hamas. He's strengthening the Muslim Brotherhood. And then he'll say that there's nobody to talk to and they all want the destruction of Israel.
And there have been Israelis who quietly, because it's a difficult position to hold, have been against this deal because, you know, it strengthens terrorism. Surely tomorrow they'll want to kidnap someone else if this is the result of it.
Now, on the surface of it, the arrest of a 56-year-old Iranian American Mansour Arabsiar, accused of plotting to blow up the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. at his favorite Washington restaurant, has nothing to do with Gilad Shalit. However, Martin Indyk, writing in Foreign Policy, reminds us, and this gets back to what Zvi Kaufman was talking about, that the demise of Syria is also Iran's problem. Contrary to the confident predictions that Iran would be the beneficiary of the Arab Spring, its efforts to spread its influence into the Arab heartland are now in trouble. It's losing its Hamas proxy to Egypt. Its Syrian ally is reeling. Turkey has turned against it. When the Iranian regime finds itself in a corner, it typically lashes out. Perhaps that explains why Arabsiar's Iranian handlers told him, just do it quickly, it's late. And your newspaper, Dana, this Friday reports that German intelligence officials have warned that Iran might even try to sabotage that deal for Shalit.
Oh, the deal for Shalit. Yes, I think that there needed to be a voice saying that, and the Germans, who have been very much involved in the negotiations and do know all the different parties, are ones to say, wait, Shalit is not home yet. I mean, there's all this like nervous, ready to rejoice, but it has not happened yet. It should happen on Tuesday. And what they're saying is, indeed, Iran, especially in that condition that you've just described, which is desperate, which if they plan this attack in Washington, they seem, and I mean, it seems like a desperate, bizarre sort of move to make, then they might work against a deal with Shalit, although it would be stupid of them, and I don't think they would succeed, but, you know, it is certainly possible that they would try and interfere there.
Just to, Chris Verdicki, are we perhaps reading too much into all of this?
Well, not really. I mean, you say it would be really stupid for Iran to try and screw up the deal with Shalit. What could be more stupid than the plot in Washington, if indeed they were involved with that? I mean, I think the problem is that Iran is very divided. I think their back is to the wall. I think the narrative that they have built their regional influence on is much harder to pitch now. They had a great advantage over the last many years because they simply said, we identified with people fighting against occupation, whether Palestinians or Shia in South Lebanon or Iraqis or Afghans. You fight against occupation, that's a fight everybody in the developing world understands, not just Arabs, not just Muslims. Easy position. It's a lot more complicated when you're talking about the Arab Spring, when you're talking about Syrian people fighting day after day, month after month, against a regime supported by Iran that looks more and more like a regime of occupation. They don't have the narrative anymore, and that's a big problem. So I think that even just in that respect, they have their backs to the wall, and then economically and lots of other ways, internally, politically, there are a lot of problems. I think it's a very fractured and unstable situation, and it leads to crazy actions.
Conservative regimes that have been around for a long time, that are now beginning to at least show cracks at the seams, in some cases have crumbled. In Nigeria, how closely have people been following the whole Arab Spring?
Well, the issue is this, that once what is regarded as something that cannot change, in quote, starts changing, and people are not prepared for it, it creates all kinds of problems because it has so many dimensions. The end of the Second World War led to all kinds of changes even in the world, including Africa, Middle East. 1990, the collapse of Soviet Union led to all kinds of changes, and people were not prepared for it. Now the Arab Spring, it caught so many people unawares, including Israel, Iran, and the whole entire Arab environment. And so it creates all kinds of dynamics, and the outcome of which we are not sure of right now. So when you are putting all these things together, you discover that African leaders, European leaders are just doing what I can call fire brigade approach because it's not part of what they have anticipated.
All right, then let's pick up on a concrete example on that. No fewer than 10 candidates have called for the cancellation of last Sunday's presidential election in Cameroon, one that's expected to see the re-election of 78-year-old Paul Biya in power already for 29 years. Now, he acknowledges there may have been, quote, imperfections in the staging of the election, but he denies fraud. Tunde, I guess the question goes beyond Cameroon. Everyone south of the Sahara, ever since last December and the events that happened first in Tunisia and Algeria, have been predicting an African spring. But do you see it coming?
Well, again, it's not predictably sure that it would come. Because in the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, all this initiative for political reforms that was started by Mitterrand, the bold speech that there is a need for democratization.
At the end of the Cold War.
Precisely. That was partially satisfied, but you discover that the old dinosaurs are still there. A friend of mine says the biggest opposition party in Africa is death. I find that very interesting. It led to the death of, it was Bongo's death in Gabon that led to some kind of shift. The death of Eyadema in Togo led to all kinds of shift. And people are now saying that it is only death, the leading opposition party, that can lead to some kind of shift in Cameroon. Biya is not ready to leave, just like some of these leaders who have been
ever ready to leave.
you know.
I was going to say, I wonder if this has something to do with it, because I spent a lot of time in East Africa, and it's very different in West and in Central Africa. But I think that the fact that many of these African countries are divided up so much by tribe and by ethnically divided and religiously and linguistically divided makes it harder for people to think in a way that they've been thinking in, say, the Arab Spring or in some of the Europeans or in Israel or in America, where people sort of have identified with each other on a socioeconomic level and sort of come out together as a group. Whereas from my experience in East Africa, people mostly are thinking about their family and then their tribe and then their region, and they're not thinking so much in terms of galvanizing support across the board.
I think it's much more complex than that, in the sense that the 60s saw the decolonization of Africa with the emergence of new elite, thinking that
and today maybe urbanization is doing the same thing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But you discover that this elite has overstayed in power. It has no new ideas. It has no new structures. The only thing it believes in is repression, more spending in terms of
so still
military spending, and with the assurance that the international community would prefer stability, in quote, to chaos, in quote.
But you know, that's interesting. You're talking about this elite inherited from decolonization. Biya is very much, of course, the example of this. And there's a book which just came out called Cameroon by two historians, French historians and one historian from Cameroon, which talks about what we call the forgotten war. There was a war that the French waged in Cameroon from 1954, I think, to 1960, which in France we didn't pay too much attention to because there was the Algerian War at the same time. So, but this is, and it was actually militarily won by the French, that one, like the Algerian War, and helped to put in power Ahidjo, and who was followed by Biya, because I understand there have only been two presidents in Cameroon since decolonization.
Yeah,
and that's 50 years ago.
And this historic episode is still very much erased from even the Cameroonian memory, and that's a big problem.
I think Tunde has a really good point, though, which is just the ability of the current situation to surprise us. I mean, I lived in Egypt for years, and when Mubarak started coming down, and I was in Cairo, every day I was surprised 5 times a day. Things that I thought could never happen were happening. And the reason they were happening is because the population, especially the young population, was infinitely better educated than it had ever been before. You know, we talk about the dissemination of information in the hinterlands of Africa. More people can read in Africa than they ever did before.
Precisely.
More people are connected to the rest of the
yeah.
world by cell phones, by satellite TV. We never talk about satellite TV, but satellite TV is what it's all about. And by the internet.
Speaking of being connected,
I
before
thought
we
I'd give you this segue.
That is just brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Before we go, I got to show you this article from the Financial Times, which talks about the great BlackBerry crumble that we saw this week. It says, first of all, that owning a BlackBerry is just not cool anymore, except perhaps for a British kid, a market not known for residual loyalty. And in the article, they talk about tales of heroism and ingenuity will abound. I walked for 3 days without an email. I had to sit listening for the entire meeting. Or I started phoning people. They don't call them crackberries for nothing, do they, Dan? It was amazing this week.
I have a BlackBerry, in fact, and it was amazing. I mean, I couldn't work, I couldn't communicate with my boyfriend. My parents thought something happened to me, and then after a day, it calms down, and you begin thinking about all these things, which I've been thinking about for a long time. I was like, God, we are so addicted to these things, and is that it's actually too much? I'm too much connected all the time, and there was this sort of calm, which
Are you going to change your ways?
And go buy an Apple 4.
Yeah, you get an Apple
I
4.
suppose
No,
that's what everybody's
Or
doing.
log on a bit less, or be a little
Or
less
log-
connected.
You know, I would like to, and I'm sorry that we are so interconnected. I sometimes wake up at night and check my messages. I mean, it is
like
pathetic.
smoking.
It is totally addictive. However, you also have to do it once you're. I mean, the world is just changing in that way, and you can't really opt out of it.
All right. Well, we'll get together for counseling and therapy.
thank
I think for all of us around this table. I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Christopher Dickey, Tunde Fatunde, and Sylvie Kaufman. And thank you for being with us for The World This Week. Stay with us because business is next. We'll get the latest on that G20 finance meeting that's going on here in Paris.